Today we officially are, the last day of this novena with Mary, begging the Holy Spirit to come down upon us as the Pentecost comes tonight at 4 o'clock with our vigil masses. And so it's good for us in these last moments before the Pentecost to really be in the cenacle with Mary and open up our hearts and our minds so that the fire of the Spirit, the sword of the Spirit, may pluck anything from our hearts that's not supposed to be there, that prevents us from following the Lord, and replace it with the beautiful salve, the beautiful Spirit of God, so that our hearts are on fire for the Lord. And this transformation can only happen when we're truly listening and opening up our hearts to the voice of God. And it's interesting, right? Like, I don't know what your favorite breakfast is, but yesterday I went to St. Monica's school in Beaver Falls. And I thought that was a very important question to ask, because the context for this conversation that Peter and John and Jesus are having is after a really delicious breakfast. I imagine they had eggs Benedict. It's probably an obvious choice with the fresh fish that they just caught. You slice that on there. And then they didn't eat bacon, but they wanted to eat bacon, so maybe Jesus gave them permission to violate the Jewish laws at that point to just enjoy bacon, because how can you have breakfast without bacon and Canadian ham? These are all obvious things. And they obviously had Irish pudding, because everybody needs to eat Irish pudding in the morning, Or pancakes, or my favorite is waffles with all the fixings on it, like chocolate and chocolate chips and whipped cream and all that, with maple syrup and all that. So that was obviously what they had. They had the greatest cup of coffee you could ever imagine, fresh squeezed orange juice from the greatest spot in the world. And they were in ecstasy, obviously. And so after that, Jesus then says, "Hey, Peter, do you love me?" And then after all of that, Peter is still worried about what John's going to be doing and what he's doing and who's doing what. And so it's as if this last few moments before Pentecost, it should be on our hearts to ask the question, are we willing to just follow Jesus? The last words that Jesus gives his Pope, his vicar on earth, are 3 words. You follow me. Those should be the 3 words we take to Mary and allow her to just pray with us on that, ponder that. And there, through that gift of being in her presence, allow our hearts to open up to the sword of the Spirit and pluck out whatever does not let us or whatever prevents us from simply following Jesus. Do you know what I mean? So what's so awesome about this is there's so many great things that we can see that show us this. And for me, one of the great ways of seeing this is, I don't know if you've ever seen this statue, but you should Google it today and then just look at there's a little video of 7 minutes on this, but if you don't want to do that, just look at the actual statue. And it's called The Ecstasy of St. Teresa of Avila. And what it is, it's done by Bernini, who's this Baroque artist who only wants to prove to the hierarchy of the time that the transcendent love of God and the power of God can be sensibly experienced in our hearts. You see, the hierarchy of the church at the time of the Renaissance became so full of themselves, so sucked into their own fears and sexual desires, that they couldn't be freed from these things that were stuck in their hearts. And so it's ironic that it's Peter, who's part of that first hierarchy, getting challenged by Jesus to just follow me and not worry about these other things, And so it's at the same time, during the Baroque time, there's this desire of Bernini, who builds the facade and does this great artist work. He loved to write dramas, so he was very good at making marble look dramatic. And what he does in this St. Teresa of Avila ecstasy is he has this angel with a dart. And the dart has this gold tip on it. And St. Teresa is in ecstasy. She's a Spanish saint who would reform the Carmelites and all that. And she's just in ecstasy. And she talks about this experience in which she saw the beauty of this angel and the piercing look of this dart being thrust into her heart. And at the same time, what Bernini does here is he has he put like a window that you can't see from inside the church, but only like this kind of glass. It's almost like the Holy Spirit thing over there, where the natural light of the Holy Spirit just comes right down onto the image, onto this beautiful statue that's stuck in a niche of Our Lady of Victory Church in Rome. And what St. Teresa describes is that until her heart wasn't pierced with such deep love by the Lord, for the Lord, it was hard for her to be able to just like give herself completely. And this total donation of just offering up her heart, even if it meant getting pierced by this angel, was so needed for her to be able to just plunge herself completely into the presence of Jesus. And so it's like Paul, you hear it in Paul, you hear it with Peter eventually, and anybody who wants to follow Jesus, that in order to follow Jesus, and this is the reason why people don't follow Jesus, you have to actually dislodge the thorns that are being thrown in by the devil and allow for the piercing of the heart of the angels to come into our hearts. So it's like this exchange. And usually what happens is that we have these anxieties and these fears, and we stick with these thorns that are stuck in there by fear and by the devil. And, the Holy Spirit wants to dislodge those and replace those with those wounds of Jesus that are in our hearts that he wants to unite us through. So in the end, it's like what St. Teresa of Avila, obviously St. Rita was of the same genre, and same with St. Elizabeth Van Seton, our first American-born saint, and same with like Servant of God, Walter Chiswick. They all saw it, that it's to see suffering that's sent from God as the greatest way we can unite ourselves to follow Jesus. And usually what happens to us is when the suffering that comes from God to us, we cower away because we're afraid of that. And when we give in to the Lord and allow him to press in on us, it's incredible, the holiness and the fruitfulness of our life. St. Rita is a perfect example of this. She was a daughter of the Father. She was forced into a brutal marriage. For 18 years, she endured the worst marriage any woman could ever imagine. She did not want to get married. She tried not to get married, but was forced into marriage. And so St. Rita is the great patroness of marriage because she stayed faithful to the marriage despite how brutal it was. Then her husband thankfully died. That's my interpretation. And she was freed from that. And then she became this beautiful nun who would spend the rest of her life allowing the darts of God to be plunged into her heart in exchange for these thorns that were put in there. And so it's as if her wounded heart could be then configured better to the great wounds of Jesus. And it's in that where we discover the work of the Holy Spirit bringing us to holiness. So it's all about breakfast, it really is, because it's about enjoying and delighting in the delights of Jesus for us, about being able to sit and have a delicious breakfast at Eaton Park or wherever you like to go, and allowing our hearts to enjoy the presence of Jesus, his love. This isn't something that you get forced into. It's something that you get loved into.